The North Pacific has been on a heater. Will that continue, and how might it impact the Pipe Masters? The North Atlantic has been cranking away too, with periods of good and very occasionally XL surf. What's in store through the next week or two, and when might the WSL event at Nazare run? The Southern Hemisphere apparently didn't get the message that it's summer. Lots of southerly surf lately. How deep into December will that persist? Along with Korte, I'm Kevin Wallis. This is Forerunners. Alrighty. Hey, Kurt. How we doing, man?
Hey, Kevin. What's going on, man? Looking good.
Yeah, as are you. You're well lit. It just I feel like each and every new episode, it just looks less and less like a prison cell. So I congratulate you on that.
Out on parole here, Kevin. Out on parole.
Stoked to hear it. All right. Hey, lot went down globally in the surf department last week. What were you seeing? What really caught your eye in the last week or so?
Yeah, it's like we discussed in the last episode of Forerunners here. The Southern Hemisphere continues to pump out some strong storms, some pretty impressive swell heights, and the result of that is some pretty good surf for places that are a little bit out of season right now. We just saw Puerto Escondido, some solid peaky offshore winds, great surf there. Some of that south swell made it up into Southern California as well for the Thanksgiving holiday weekend. Met with pretty great conditions. All in all, we're kind of playing with house money when it comes to those Southern Hemisphere swells out of the South Pacific. And not to be outdone, the South Indian Ocean also been churning out some pretty solid storms and swell, as you can see here on the Margaret River cam. That's not going to stop, as we'll take a look later in the show. But lots of waves still coming out of our southern oceans here as we head, into the middle part of December. Definitely impressive, and we'll definitely take it. More waves, the better, right?
Yeah, we're stoked. And hey, as impressive as the Southern Hemisphere was, I think the North Pacific was probably the big winner. We started with pumping swell in Hawaii. Was another Black Friday swell that had pipe firing at different points during the day and different points over a couple of days in between wash-throughs. We had what was opening day at Peahi. Not a crazy opening day by any means. There was a lot of wind. It wasn't a giant swell, but it was a solid swell. And just really good surf overall. We'll talk to Eala Stewart a little bit later on about some of his waves at Pipeline. That swell eventually made its way over to the West Coast too. We had just cranking surf for Northern California. Not really like a big wave swell, but we had incredible surf for like Ocean Beach, San Francisco. Fun waves down into Southern California at roughly the same time as that Southern Hemisphere swell. So it was a really nice run of waves, and we've got more. That North Pacific's really going to stay active, as we'll get into a little bit later in the show. And I know you had a close eye on the North Atlantic too. What was going on over there?
Yeah, well, we had the ominously named Storm Bert that impacted the UK. That was a hurricane force low, and I was looking back at this. Typically we see about 4 hurricane force lows in November in the North Atlantic. Bert checked the box there. Seas over 40 feet. Interesting swell. Like where this actual storm was when it was most intense. Sends a pretty northerly directed swell down to parts of Western Europe. For Nazare here, this is one of our 2 cams that we have there that shows those beautiful peaks coming through. Another spot that really turned on here was Mundaka. From forecasting the events back there in the early to mid 2000s, extremely tidal. Pretty small swell window, right? Like you get west of like 290 or something like that, it ends up getting blocked. So you really need to have that northwest swell direction. And this one was about as north as you get to get past Ireland and some of those blocks that you have as you get more northerly there through the Bay of Biscay. So interesting look, but you can see just razor edge, just ruler lines coming through. Great swell direction, tide, wind combination, all working probably for a period of minutes. As we know, it tends to be rather transient there. But really, great start to the season. I feel like we've seen some really great footage from Mundaka so far. So hopefully that's a sign of what we have here over the coming months.
Yeah. So overall, it was kind of a barn burner the last 7 to 10 days. What are we focusing on this week?
Well, the Southern Hemisphere again is gonna really take a lot of my attention. I think you get some strong storms happening in the Indian Ocean. You and I were back and forth on the storm that's down there, 40-foot seas. Observed by buoy and satellite. Storm's weakening now. We're going to send a nice pop over to Indonesia, Western Australia. Also seeing some strong storm activity in the South Atlantic. Pretty strong storm there. Another little short wave coming through that's going to bump some surf heights up. Southern hemisphere for me is really standing out.
Yeah, and I'll take the North Pacific again. It's going to slow down a little bit. We're not going to see another storm with like 40-foot seas, but really going to remain quite active. A bunch more mid-sized swells for Hawaii, possibly fairly solid into Northern California. Looks like pretty good conditions for Northern California again too. So lots more waves coming out of the North Pacific. And hey, with the North Pacific top of mind right now, we are going to bring on our fellow forecaster Jonathan Warren. He is our primary Hawaii forecaster. He's also going to be issuing the official forecast for the Vans Pipe Masters, which opens on Sunday and is going to run from the 8th to the 20th. We're also going to say goodbye to Kurt Korte. He got called back to another prison cell, so he's out of here for the rest of the show. Thanks for joining us, Kurt, and welcome, John, to Forerunners. Happy to have you here.
Thanks for having me, Kevin and Kurt. See you later. Yeah, so in short, we have a lot of swell on the radar for the Pipe Masters. As you said, Kevin, the event window is from the 8th to the 20th, so that's a pretty good long window to get some swell for pipeline, especially right now in December. This is, as you guys said earlier in this show, it's been pretty good on the North Shore so far. That ball's going to continue as far as the pulses coming. Mid range, pretty solid. We'll have to see how things shake out, especially towards the end of the event window. But things are going to kick off with a couple pretty good sized swells from the northwest in the very first days of the event window. We are going to be watching conditions though, as trade winds look like they're going to get pretty breezy. So right here on screen, this is our Lotus swell animation. Thanks, Mark, for pausing it right here. This arrow you see on screen is a developing storm and swell right now in the central North Pacific. It's going to send a pretty solid pulse for Monday. That is the second day of the event window on the 9th. There is a pulse that's going to come in just before it on Saturday, before the event window kicks off. Leftovers on Sunday, fading, could be pretty fun at backdoor, but not proper pipeline. Good conditions, it could be contestable if they really wanted to get out there in the water, but I think they have a lot of options that are going to be lined up for them later in the event window. So Monday looks pretty solid. Trade winds are going to start kicking up though, but more pulses stacking up throughout next week. As we make our way through the middle part of the month, we're watching all these pulses. Basically the North Pacific action is going to continue, a conveyor belt of these lows moving across the basin. The storm track lifted a little further north than how it's been. So we're not expecting something as big as, say, like that Black Friday swell, but still definitely good size to get pipelines stirring. It's more of just picking out which swell is going to be best with direction and period, so we can see proper pipeline. One thing we need to watch for, though, is conditions. As you see on screen, this is just an example of what we're expecting throughout much of next week. Just strong east-northeast trade winds, which is a side to offshore flow. So not a bad wind direction, but not ideal, just simply based on the wind just cranking so hard. So it's definitely going to be contestable, but not ideal again. But we are going to watch, again, towards the end of the event window for these trades to possibly slack off as the front moves its way to the north of Hawaii, to make those trades slack off veer more easterly, which is more offshore and lighter, and then keeping a close eye on a possibility of of a series of pretty sizable northwest swells. So definitely one to keep a watchful eye for. I think at this point, Monday is one they should heavily take a look at for a possible run. And then just see how things shape up from day to day. It's definitely a tricky forecast, Kevin, that we're going to have to pick the eyes out of. A very highly volatile North Pacific right now of how things are going to shake out. Like with each model run, things are changing. On one model run, it shows a big blip on the radar. Then the next day, not so much. It backs down to like more of a modest pulse. So we'll have to take each day as it comes to.
Yeah, as I've looked through the forecast a little bit, my takeaway was it's kind of a messy forecast, and I don't mean that in the sense that it's a bad forecast necessarily, but I think the big takeaway, like the big picture takeaway, is like there's a lot of swell that's lining up, probably medium size for the most part, with decent potential for a couple solid pulses. A lot of wind for most of next week, which, as you mentioned, is doable, but it's not ideal. By any means. And then maybe those last few days, we've seen a trend just in the last couple model runs for those last few days, couple days or so, the wind looks a little bit better. So let's hold out hope, because that could really set up pretty good surf towards the end of the waiting period if those things obviously come together. So stay tuned on that. And hey, it's time now to see if you're paying attention to what John just said. We're going to bring up our Surfology 101 quiz. This is the pipeline edition. John, what do we got for our Surfology 101 quiz this week?
All right. So what is the ideal swell direction and period for pipeline? Now, keyword there, ideal, because pipeline can break, it can have breaking waves on a lot of different swell directions and periods, but what is the ideal swell direction and period for pipeline? Is it A, shorter period northwest swell, B, longer period west-northwest swell, C, longer period north swell, or D, shorter period swell from the northeast? Or E, phone a friend.
Stay tuned. We're going to answer this question, the Surfology 101 quiz question, just after our global outlook and Purple Blob of the week, which is coming up right now. All right, we're going to have a look at our global wave height animation to start, and I probably sound like a little bit of a broken record if you've been watching Forerunners the last couple of weeks, but this is at least the third Forerunners in a row that have mentioned this. But the Southern Hemisphere really continues to impress. It's been as active, if not even more so, than the Northern Hemisphere, which is saying something, because we've moved actually now into meteorological summer in the Southern Hemisphere. This is when those storms are supposed to be slowing down, and really haven't shown any signs of doing that just yet. As we zoom into our next basin, the North Pacific, what are we seeing up there, John? I know you just covered Hawaii, but especially what do we got for like California and the West Coast?
Yeah, so after these storms send these pulses to Hawaii, well, it's going to eventually continue to track further east towards the West Coast. A lot of good surf. What I was saying about that storm track earlier, these lows are moving across the basin, and then they're pulling northward up to the Gulf of Alaska. The good thing about that is that they're just sending all the swell while staying clear of California from all the inclement weather. Instead of slamming into the West Coast with bad winds, they're going to pull out of the way and just send all the goods. So we have a series of west-northwest swells going to be moving into California basically for the rest of this week, like through all of next week. It's looking very promising for areas north of Point Conception. We're going mid to solid at the better exposed winter breaks there. Down in Southern California with a little bit of shadowing by Point Conception, not as big as areas further north, but fun size west-northwest swells, just west enough to get in there, but more of that modest to fun zone range for the winter breaks of Southern California. And then
one thing that before we move into the South Pacific, one thing we just got word of from our primary Northern California forecaster, that's Keaton Browning. He's thinking we're going to do an incoming article probably early next week on Monday for the surf through Central and Northern California around the middle of next week. Looks like, as you just mentioned, we've got a lot of swell coming in. It looks like good conditions will continue too. So keep an eye out for that incoming with more details on surf in Northern California incoming for the middle of next week. Sorry to interrupt you. Get down in the South Pacific, John.
Yeah, so as these series of west-northwest swells just pulsating into the West Coast, we still have a little bit of some Southern Hemi juice, as you guys touched on earlier. The South Pacific doesn't want to quit. And now these most recent storms and swells and the ones that are going to be developing here over the next few days, they're much better aimed at Central and South America. So good time to book a late trip here, in the off season. I mean, people don't really think about going down to Costa Rica or Peru in December, but could be a good option here if you're looking for a place to go score in this month. Nothing too crazy, nothing XL, but definitely fun size surf and fairly solid, especially for this time of year for areas south of the border. And how's that going to shape up for California? Well, it should be just enough juice to help cross up those Southern Hemi swells, especially for Southern California. So, look for the beach breaks of SoCal be pretty peaky throughout next week. And good winds and weather down there too right now. So
cool. So we'll move up to the North
Atlantic.
The North Atlantic. There. I'm stepping on your toes, man. I'm sorry. But hey, we've got a big storm hammering the UK this weekend. Big but tricky surf conditions for the most part. Really buttressed by very strong high pressure out to the west too. Looks like some of the areas of the northern UK could clean up as we head into early next week. But overall, just a lot of weather, a lot of surf, things you probably want to run from. That same swell is going to get into the continent over the weekend into early next week. We're looking at that for Nazare, but it's kind of like the swell we saw about a week ago, where there's a lot of north in it. There's probably going to be a lot of north wind too, so it's not a great swell for Nazare. North wind is doable, but it's not the ideal there for sure. Thinking about Nazare and the event, the WSL event there, one thing we are starting to look at is out past beyond mid-month. Looks like we could see a pattern that would develop at least temporarily, that could produce better surf and maybe event worthy surf for the Nazare big wave event as we move a couple days past mid-month, give or take a little bit. So something we're going to keep an eye on. The other really interesting thing about this storm, it's going to drive a long way south. It's going to set up pretty good surf in the Mediterranean, the Western Mediterranean, kind of late this weekend, early next week. Keep an eye on that. We'll see what type of footage comes out of there, because obviously Mediterranean is pretty fickle spot, or fickle zone, I should say. Lots of spots there. But when it turns on, it really can get good. So I look forward to seeing some pretty blue barrels coming out of the Mediterranean, hopefully early next week. All right, we're going to go basically the exact opposite area of the globe next, and that's the Indian Ocean. And we've got another shoulder season storm with 40-foot seas in it. We just saw some satellite passes and floating buoys that registered 40-foot seas in this particular storm. We got solid southwest swells going to hit southwest WA on Monday and Tuesday. Looks like pockets of manageable winds in the morning, pretty strong south-southeast to southeast wind. It's like side offshore, should be lightest in the morning, so that's what I'd look to score then. Fun to mid-size swell for Indonesia Wednesday, Thursday. We may see something flare up out of the tropics too that could kick in some shorter to mid-period westerly swell around that time as well. So something we'll be keeping an eye on there. And then as we move over into the South Atlantic, this is actually our Purple Blob of the week, potentially one of the stronger storms of the year in the South Atlantic over this weekend. Looks like we've got solid swell lining up for the Cape Town region around Tuesday, Wednesday. This is like potentially a big wave type of swell. The winds don't look great for the various big wave spots, but they look okay. They look like they could be manageable, at least light enough onshore to be okay. And then maybe some J-Bay action right around the middle part of the week from this really impressive low that at various points has been forecasted to produce seas up in the 40 to 45 foot plus range. Recent model guidance is back down just a little bit, but still looks like a really impressive storm that's going to go on down in the South Atlantic. All right, we're going to swing back to the North Pacific now and to Pipeline to answer our quiz question. And John, remind our users and our audience what that question was, and we're on pins and needles for the answer too. What do we got?
All right. Yeah, once again, it's what is the ideal swell direction end period for the Banzai pipeline to come alive? That is B, longer period west-northwest swell. So it's, like anything over 16 seconds, especially, but not too long. You don't, pipe gets a little funky over 20 seconds, but, in 15, 16, 17 seconds, I think is ideal for pipe, especially from that west-northwest direction to northwest around, 295 to 300, 350. 295 to 330 degrees. Sorry about that. So let's cover some of these other answers and what might be good on it. So we talked about a shorter period northwest swell. Well, look for spots like backdoor to come alive when the period starts to shorten up a bit. It's still from that northwest direction. You can see here the swell window spectrum for the different spots around the pipeline arena. So that west-northwest direction is ideal for pipe. Gets a little bit more north in it. Look for backdoor start coming alive, especially when the period shortens up a bit. And backdoor will still be breaking pretty good when it starts turning more of a north-northeast direction or north-northwest direction, sweeping down the reef, almost like a point at that point, with like a right point break and to off the wall as you make your way further north of a swell direction. We also had a shorter period northeast swell that was in the mix of those answers. That's not good for anywhere really in the pipeline arena. That shorter period, like northeast, say, just call it a trade swell. You can have breaking waves. Sometimes backdoor can be fun if it's big enough.
You get that sandbar that sets up sometimes, like it's like backdoor point basically.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen too often, but here and there that'll set up.
And
the other thing, John, that I've found really interesting too is, so we're covering all these spots, right? So we've got pipe, backdoor, off the wall, and you go down to rock pile, and the distance from pipe, or let's say like gums and pipe down to rock pile is, I don't know, maybe 500 meters tops.
Right.
And so all these spots you're mentioning like can come alive or go dormant on all these little variations of swell period. Like a north swell, for example. Like, I mean, pipe's not doing anything. It may be head high, and then you look down the beach down towards rock pile, and depending on the size of the swell, it could be absolutely pumping there. So it's a fascinating breakdown of these swell directions and swell periods. You've done a great job with this graphic here. This is from our old mechanics of pipeline. And I cut you off again. I keep stepping on your toes. I apologize. But what's the spot to be on that long period north swell? How about that?
Yeah, that long period north. Look for rock piles to turn on. Further down the coast to the west, Laniakea will get really, really good. And some other spots even further to the west I don't want to mention here on this show. But there are definitely spots on the North Shore, the famous North Shore, the 7-mile stretch there to look for. That focuses those north swells best, but also look for those north swells to get more energy into spots over on the east side. But you got to time the best winds and conditions over there, as most of the time they're dealing with onshore trade winds. So you got to wait for those trades to slack off, and you have a north swell, then you can look for some gems over there.
I'm going to give a quick story time here. And that's like one of the craziest things I've ever seen on the North Swell, or on the North Shore. There was a giant North Swell. This is maybe about 10 years ago or so. It was during the Haleiwa event. And Haleiwa is generally not good on North Swell. It's just a fraction of the size of most other spots, 10 to 20% of the size of, say, like Laniakea on a North Swell. But this North Swell was so big that Haleiwa was still pretty solid, still probably 2 times overhead. And then out to the west, you got avalanche, right? And you've got all that water, avalanche is pumping out of North Swell. You got all that water coming off the reef and just creating this current that's running through the Haleiwa lineup. And so they start to run a heat or two, and guys are taking off, and Haleiwa's a right. They're taking off and surfing right, but because the current is so strong, they're drifting back to the left. So they're like almost back behind where they started, even though they were going right. It was one of the wildest things I've ever seen on the North Shore, and it was like a 20-foot North Swell at Laniakea, and Haleiwa was double overhead or something. Anyway, story time done. And hey, now that we're all experts on the mechanics of pipeline, we're going to wrap up with someone who's an expert on riding pipeline. We recently caught up with North Shore local pipe enthusiast Eala Stewart to get a breakdown of his recent wave of the day and a great candidate for the wave of the winter, as well as the upcoming Pipe Masters. So we're going to close with that this week. For Korte, who's back in prison, Jonathan Warren here, I'm Kevin Wallis. We'll be back with the next edition of Forerunners on December 20th. So we'll see you then. Thanks for watching.
Eala Stewart, welcome to Forerunners. Pleasure to have you here. You got a couple crazy waves here in the last few days. Can you talk us through that Black Friday and Saturday swell in terms of like size, conditions, crowd, everything you're experiencing out there?
I feel like everyone thought it was going to be a pipe swell, which it ended up being, but it actually got under forecasted, and last year's did that too. I think when we're looking at pipe swells, we try to have like this 10-foot range with west in it and 16 to 18 seconds, and that's what this was saying. But the outside buoys popped at like 17 that night, and so I never usually surf pipe on rising swells, but for some reason I just wanted to on this one, just because I kind of knew we would have a window before it started washing through in the afternoon. So that was Black Friday. I surfed that morning for 4 hours, I think 8 to 12, and then the second reefer started to get more consistent, and I came in 10 minutes before Jamie O'Brien and Mike Stewart shared that wave, so I got to bust out my phone and video that. So that was cool to see. And yeah, then the washes started getting more consistent, and the outside buoy readings were going to come eventually. So we all kind of shifted gears and put some fins in our Waimea boards and get the PSI vest and our impact vest ready for the sunset sesh at Waimea. The next day, we kind of thought it would be a pipe day.
Yeah, and that wave you got on Saturday, wave of the day, Liam McNamara was frothing on it. Can you talk us through that a little bit from when you saw it coming to when you kicked out? What does it take to make a wave like that at Pipe?
Every session at Pipe, we go out there, or at least I do, with a fresh mindset. Like, one magical wave could come in and be the wave of your life, or that wave of the winter can come in. So every session we start fresh, and there's really good potential that day because I like Pipe on the kind of peaked out downside of the swell. And yeah, just had all these characteristics. The wind started getting super light and had like this midday bubble where usually the trades get strong midday, but it just started getting like light and classy cloud break conditions, Tahiti. I was like, whoa, it's so sick. And then the waves will stop losing their energy when they're rolling in from second reef, and then they can like kind of focus and stack up gnarly onto the first reef. So it's kind of doing that, and there's just really good potential for that wave to come in. And yeah, I seen that wave and my heart dropped. I'm like, oh, this is the one. Has a double up in it, and I was first priority for that wave, luckily enough. And there's a couple guys out the back on the outer reef, and a couple guys on the inside are catching waves already. So I was like right in the middle. So that was my pick of the wave, and I got to ride that beautiful wave and just enjoy that beautiful view and just hold on as best as I could through that spit. And I was so stoked when I made it because the whole beach erupted and it felt like a really deep, good wave. I didn't think it was that big at first, but until I seen the video clip.
So pretty big, crazy. So switching gears a little bit. So you're in the Pipe Masters, which the window opens in just a couple of days here on December 8th. What are you most looking forward to about Pipe Masters, the Vans Pipe Masters this year?
Yeah, I'm just super grateful for the opportunity this year. I haven't gotten the invite the last 2 years, but I just try to stay positive and let my surfing do the talking. So just having that opportunity to surf Pipe with 3 guys out means so much for me as a Hawaiian, and Pipe's like one of my biggest love affairs I have. So just being able to get, like I said, every session is like a new opportunity for the wave of your life and the wave of the winter to come in. But I think the Pipe Masters this year is no elimination. I think it's like the Hui style. I assume so. At least I'm going to get 3 chances to surf them. Yeah, hopefully we get some fun waves.
Yeah, well, Eala, thank you very much for joining Forerunners. Best of luck in the Pipe Masters. Can't wait to see you surf, and hopefully you get another wave like you did this past Saturday. So thanks again.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the forecasting always. Aloha.